Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here with a new Cinema 4D tutorial about how to use the new Grow Grass function in Cinema 4D R15 to cut nice little lines in a baseball diamond or a football field and get a lot of control over this new feature that I think you can do some really cool stuff and I'm really excited about. So one of the things, like I just said, that came out in R15 is if you have a landscape, there's now an environment thing called Grow Grass. And there was a lot of tutorials that came out right away about what this was. And I had a sports graphic project come up for opening day for the Cubs and White Sox here in good old Chicago. And what I wanted to do is not just grow a bunch of grass, but I wanted to figure out how to use this to mimic the idea of what we see in sports stadiums where there's grass, but it's really, really manicured and specific, and we're in these really specific little lines and cuts and, getting a lot of pinpoint control over this. And like I said, there was a lot of tutorials about how to just grow grass, and I really wanted to figure this out, and I went through a bunch of trials with it, and I got it working really specifically, and you can do a lot with it. So let me just show you quickly the project that I worked on this for, and then we'll get into it. And the main point that I use this is this nice wide shot where the camera is pulling back behind all this text and logo and the ball flies over. And then when it gets to here, there's these little lines of these foul lines that would be like these old style ones where they're still cut in the grass. And if we look at these renders I did, I'm mimicking this idea here on this baseball field where if we're figuring, again, maybe this is like Detroit where there's this nice little patch of dirt that goes up to where the mound would be if you want to raise that. And rather than just dropping the foul lines on the dirt like they actually do, even though it's not as completely realistic, what if it was cut out of grass? And what if there's this tiny little path that's not growing, so they're blocking the grass? And again, another cool example I came up with is if we have a football field and it's not as thin of grass, but we're really controlling this to mimic the idea of they're painting these lines on and they're painting the end zone a different color, and you can really go in there and have logos painted on, and it's not just dropping colors on, it's actually coloring the grass down to this precise little line. So how we got this working is on these grass textures. If we look at all this, and we'll start this from scratch, there's this density texture, and you can use black and white images and shades of gray to grow grass in specific areas and not grow grass in other areas. And we can use Illustrator to set up these really precise graphics of black and white images that look like a baseball field or a football field and have textures that say grow grass here, and then other ones that say, if we look at the football one, everywhere that's white, we're gonna have grass, and black we're not. So this is our green, and then our white is all of this, and then we have one that's just the end zone. So using Illustrator in combination with this, or Photoshop if you wanted to, you can get really precise results and do some really cool stuff. So that's enough of me talking. Let's get started with this and we'll set this up. So I'm gonna do a file, new project in Cinema 4D, and how we're gonna get started is we're gonna grab our basic shapes, and I'm going to grab a landscape. And what this is going to do is create this kind of bumpy, mountainy looking thing. And if we're thinking about stadiums, it's probably not like this, but we need this to grow our grass on. And if I have this selected and then click on my environment objects, you can see that there's grow grass, and that's going to drop a texture on here that is this little grass icon. And if I double click here, we can see that now I have a separate texture with all different settings than regular textures specifically for this new grass thing. And if I look at my render settings, it's now added this hair render. And this is how this is functioning, is by using the hair render. So just really basics, how this is working is now that this is on, it doesn't look like anything, but if I do Command R, we'll see that we're getting some grass. And if I'll just do Option R to take a look at what we're doing as I change this. And how this is working is there's a basic shader of nothing on this landscape, so we're getting our gray, and we have our grass color, which is a gradient. So this is the top. So if I wanted the top to be like blue and the bottom to be like white, we see that we could have it go from one color to the other. And I don't know why we'd ever do that, but we can. And we can do things like distribute and invert knots, of course. And our main settings are our blade length, so how tall it's growing. So you can see that's super tall, how wide that width is, so how thick that blade of grass is. So if I just bring this way down to like 15, but it's really chunky, you can see it's really wide strands of grass, and how dense it is. So let's put this like 25 and 1, and we can see that there's a lot of patchiness, but if we bring the density up, it's going to fill that in a lot, but also take a lot longer to render. And we don't have any settings on, but you can see it still took a little longer. And then we have different little things like our crinkle, if I look closer, of how it's bending that. So if I just put all of these at 0, 0, we can see that it's just going to be straight up grass. And then I can add crinkle and bend to add a little bit of interest to it, or go really far and it's really just weird twisty looking grass. And our wetness is actually our specular highlight, so I'll just change this to a more reasonable color so we can see what I'm talking about. And you can see if we turn the wetness way up, we're going to get a lot of specular highlight on this, and if it's off, we're not going to get any. So that's kind of the basics, and that's fine if you're doing a field, but like I said, I want to get really precise with this. And what is the key to this is this density texture tab right here. And what this allows us to do is, if I just zoom out here, if I click this, I can get my normal texturing things and do things like color, Frangella, gradient, noise, any of these, colorize, or import images. And as an example, if I do gradient, now it's going to pop up a gradient, and like I said, in the black areas, it's not going to grow grass, and in the white areas it is. So if I just make a gradient, you can see that it's chopping off the grass. So I could make this a really precise line, and you can see that we could get little rainbow stripes of grass growing, grass not growing, grass growing, grass not growing, grass not growing. And you can see it looks like a lawnmower is going through this bluish green grass. And that's cool and all, but like I said, if we're doing a field, we can use Illustrator to draw really specific shapes. So that's kind of the basic. Let's get started with setting this up for a field. So I got my landscape, and I'm just gonna delete that texture, and we'll start from scratch. So now if I rendered, nothing's here, and I'm gonna grab this landscape, and how this is working is it's creating these mountains and hills, and if I just on the size take this Y down, it's gonna flatten it out and basically look like a plane. But I can still grab my environment and grow grass on it, and it'll add that grass texture, and that's what I want. So how we're gonna set this up is, if I make this a specific shape and match that in Illustrator, I can line up how I want to cut my lines and paths into it. So on my landscape, I'm just going to make this 2000 by 0 by 2000. And then I'm going to pull the camera out a bit and do Alt Command R. And we can see it's going to prepare our grass down here for rendering, and then grow our grass on that. Now it's already pretty short, and that's good. So I'm just going to go to the texture and now start to edit it a little more. And if we press Option R to just look at our viewport, we can start to just edit this a little more and just focus on a little patch of it to get an idea of what's happening. And what I want to do is take this blade width down a little. So let's put that at like 1.25, so it's not these big chunky ones. And I'm going to turn up the density quite a bit, and that's going to fill it in a lot. And again, if I just turn this up, it's going to take a second to render because it is using the hair renderer. And that's going to fill it in more closely to what a baseball field would look like. And we might want to bring our crinkle and bend down a bit, and I'll just turn this render off for now, and just put crinkle at like 5 and bend at 15. And let's just start to do Shift R render so we can compare how this is going. So just do Shift R to render this to viewport. And there's our grass. Now I only need to kind of see what's going on. I don't need to render this whole thing. And as I mentioned, the hair render is a little render heavy. So for render settings, I'm just going to go to Output, and I'll just smooth this at like 400 by 300, just so as I'm previewing this. Now, the big things that make this look real, as we can see, it just looks like a bunch of green CG grass, is if I zoom in here, what we have going on here is it's all growing, but nothing's happening with lights. And that's kind of really what helps this. And to make that point, what I'm going to do is I got my grass field. I'm just going to drop in a basic light and move it up and over here, and make that a little orangish, and turn the intensity down a bit. and copy paste that. I'll just have like a blue one over here, just so I can start getting some lights. And I'll even add under environments a physical sky, and that'll kind of light things up a bit, maybe take the intensity down a bit. Now, what's gonna make this grass look real is on my lights having shadows, and in render settings having on ambient occlusion, so it's going to read the areas and light them in between the grass. So again, this was just our basic render of just the grass. Now, if I, in render settings, turn on ambient occlusion, let's see what that adds to it and just get a bit closer in our render up here. So just zoom in a bit so we can really see what's happening here between the 3 shots. And I'll just do another render. And I think I might have straightened this out a little too much too, actually. So besides this, I'm gonna go back to my crinkle, and I'll just turn these back up to like 10 and 50 because I might have overdone that a bit, and maybe turn my wetness down. So now the point I wanna make is, let's do 3 renders. I'll do 1 just basic. So let's just do Shift R, basic render, no ambient occlusion or shadows. So that's what we got. It's our grass. And now I'm gonna turn on ambient occlusion, and that'll get us a little bit there, and maybe zoom in a bit more so we can really see what's happening here. So I'll go like right here, do another render. And you can see that's definitely starting to help and look a little bit more real. And then on my lights, what's really gonna help this is if I grab both of them and add any kind of shadows. So I'll just do soft so it doesn't take so long to render, and render this again. Now we can see that we're starting to get a lot more realism. So again, with shadows and AO on, without the shadows, not getting much detail, and without shadows or ambient occlusion, really just a bunch of green CG grass. So those are key settings that we're gonna wanna have on to make this look realistic at the end. And as we're working, we don't need them on if we're just cutting this grass. I'll turn that off, and for my shadows over here on my lights, I'll just turn those back off, and we'll turn those on at the end. And the other thing we notice is there's kind of some gray showing through here because there's still this basic landscape, and we want to cover that up a bit and have some sort of texture. So for that, how that works is if I just double click and make a new texture, and I'll double click this and just call this dirt. And we could get some maps of dirt or kind of just make a basic color. And I don't want to worry about too much detail on the dirt just because the focus is on the grass. So I'll just make kind of a brown, and then I'll just add kind of a bump just so it looks a little bit more like dirt. So I'll go to noise, and for noise, I'll click that, and for noise texture, maybe I'll just grab this one. I think worked well, and to get it a little more bumpy, I'll just pull global scale way down, and then you can see it's getting a little noise, and not the world's best dirt texture, but we're not going to see much of it, so it'll definitely do. And maybe we'll go a little more reddish, more like a little clay that it would be, and that's fine. So now if we drop this onto our landscape, it's going to be the main texture, and we can see that it's on there, and we can edit that like any normal texture. So I can just grab the tag, and I'll turn on seamless and turn tiles up quite a bit. Again, we're not going to see much of this, but for the mound and things like that, we'll want something in there, and we could always have another tutorial video about making a dirt texture that I'm sure would be very exciting. So now if we do another render, we can see how this fills in those holes that we see below it. And we don't have our shadows and ambient occlusion on, but we can see that that fills in that little areas that we can see, and that can be our base path, and that's great. Now, how do we cut this like the diamonds and fields and get into that? Because that was the whole point of this tutorial, not just basic grass, but how to get really custom with it. So let's get to that because we're already 10 minutes in, and we got to get to the point. So like I mentioned, we can use Illustrator for that. So I'm just going to go into Illustrator and make a new document. And since I made that ground at 2000 by 2000, I can just do that as well, 2000 by 2000. And that'll help me kind of block out visually what I'm cutting in and out. And again, why Illustrator is such a great tool for this is because it's going to be so precise that we can grab images and make them black and white and then invert those, and we're gonna get this really specific exact line that we can cut and invert and add a different grass and change the settings and density and really get control over this. So how I'm gonna get started with this is if we just kind of visualize that this is a baseball diamond. We could look up a reference if we want to, but let's just try it from scratch. So how we can get started with this is figure we want to have an area for the bases and enough for the grass to go around. So I'm just going to grab a rectangle and let's just block this out. Let's say holding shift and drawing that. Here's third base, and then I'll hold shift and just, this will be first base, and hold shift and option to make another copy. There's second base, and this can be home plate down here, and we don't need to look exact, but why not? Let's zoom in here, and I'll just go to plus with a pen tool and make a point and drag that down with the direct arrow, and there's our home plate reference that we didn't even need to draw, that we can rotate around to get our kind of area blocked out. So if those are bases, we're going to want to have dirt around the edges as well as the pitcher's mound, and then some base paths, and we can again figure, they could not be drawn on dirt, or it could be drawn on grass if it's an older field, or whatever we're doing. So anyway, let's grab an ellipse over here, or press L to get that, and I'm going to draw circles from the center around these ideas of bases, and this is going to be where our dirt is. So we have that one, we have this one up, again holding shift and option and then letting go of the mouse to duplicate. There's our three base areas, and then this one will be around home plate, and we can even make that bigger if we wanted, or make it a rectangle, or whatever field we want to draw. Now I'll just pull all of this out so it's not out of our texture, and what we can do is grab all of these, and we want to make sure we're on exactly black. You can see that it's display black and it's kind of gray, and we want this exact black because that's going to really make sure it's exactly no grass there. Now what I want to do is let's make a pitcher's mound, so I'll just copy this one again and pull it back a little, and I'm assuming that's exactly mathematically how it is on a baseball field. And then I want to draw base paths exactly cutting in from the center of these. So I'm going to grab this ellipse and press Command R to get my guides, and just drag a guide in the middle of each of these for reference for later. So I know that these are exactly lining up. Now for the base paths, what I can do is I'm going to grab a rectangle up here, or press M, and I'm just going to draw that down as precise as I want to be and line it up with the center, because that's going to be important. And again, I can duplicate that with a little Illustrator trick by, if I hold R to rotate it, and then as I'm holding rotate, hold shift to constrain, and then option to duplicate, and then let go of the mouse. That's going to rotate it on this axis, constrained in 45 degrees, and let me get to 90, let go of the mouse and make a duplicate. And I can do that same thing by grabbing it again, or grabbing this one, and let's hold shift and option to duplicate it. Let's put a guide in here and pull the same thing up here, and this kind of blocks out my infield. And like I said, if I even want it to be like an old school one, or I know Detroit has this cool little path that goes from the pitcher's mound to home plate, I can duplicate that, rotate it into place, and move it over, and just scale this one down a bit if I wanted that little path in there, because that looks pretty cool. Now I got my little infield, I got my scale. What I want to do is have that line around the edge. If I look at my other density map here, we're mimicking the idea of an infield, and it's going to curve around and have more dirt. And again, this could be whatever pattern you want it to be. But what I'm going to do is I want to have a smooth curve around the edges from here to here. So I'm just going to grab another ellipse and just draw that out, and then flip from fill to stroke, and I'm just going to scale this until it just about lines up on the edge there and there. And then if I just grab all of this and move it over a bit, what I want to do with this edge one of the infield is I'll grab that, and I'm going to get my scissors tool, or press C, and cut here and here where it intersects. Then grab my direct select arrow, or press A, grab this end of the line, just delete that. Then what I'm going to do, because I only need to block this out with a positive and negative space, is just grab my pen tool with P and click here, and I can just really roughly draw and fill that in. And there's a bunch of ways to do that in Illustrator, but that's a quick one. And then what I want to do is just flip this, and then I have my black area, and that gets us to our infield. And now this looks a little too big, and I wouldn't quite want to have that. So I'm able to scale this down so it'll match up in the center, and we can always change that more later. And that'll get us there. We can always make tweaks and resave new ones as we go. Now, like I said, it's going to grow grass only in the white area, so that's why we're cutting this out in black. So what I want to do is save this just to keep it backed up. So I'll just call this as density map A3 in this case. And then to get it into Cinema 4D, I'm going to do File Save for Web just so I can get a quick JPEG of it, and that'll save a JPEG. And to save that, and what I'm going to do is make two of these. I'm going to have one for the green grass and one for the white grass. And so I'll call this density map A. Then I'm going to go back over to Cinema 4D, and how I'm going to use this is on my grass texture. I'm going to double click the grass, and for density texture, I'm going to click the little periods to load an image, and then I can grab that and press enter. Don't need to copy it, and you can see it kind of previews that, and now it's going to cut into that grass, kind of mow the grass completely out because it's completely 100% black and 100% white. So if I do a quick shift render and to preview this so it looks at least decent, I'll turn back on my ambient occlusion and turn on my shadows so we can see what's going on. And I'll close all these out, and let's just do a quick shift render of the whole thing. And you can see we are getting there. This is cutting our grass, and that's exactly what we wanted. Now, we're always going to be making little tweaks, so I'll just minimize this. We can see our dirt isn't quite there, and even though it's not the focus, let's work that a little. I'll change that brown a bit, and you can see I got to get rid of that specular because dirt is not going to be that reflective. So I'll just take that way down. Probably wouldn't be any reflective, but we'll just have a little. And close that, and maybe now that we can see that we're getting a lot of the dirt, grab that tag and just not loop it so many times so we're still getting a little bit of detail. And again, all these little tweaks are kind of what you can keep doing as you work this and get to look realistic. But the big challenge here is working these grass textures. Now we're here, we can line this up with our camera, and let's even just make a camera now so we can see what we're doing and maybe take the focal length down to like 24 so we can see more and get a little distorted. So we'll do that. Go 24 for focal length, or 25. No, let's go 24 and just zoom in here and line this up. So this is where we are if we do another render. And it's a low res render, but you can see we got our baseball field, so we're getting there. But now, how do we put some of that grass back if we want just a little line that's in the grass? And how do we do another one at a very specific area that's cutting into this? That was the challenge for me because I got here pretty easily, and I knew how to get the Illustrator thing drawn out, but thinking about how to line this up to where it's really exactly pulling right here. Say if, this infield, or if we looked at our football field, it's got to be exact. It's got to cut that line exactly, and then the next line keep going over. And then the next line start exactly right there. So it looks like these numbers are painted in. And it took me a while to go back and forth and do some tests of how to do this and how to get it exactly lined up. But what we can do is let's go back over in Illustrator, and we have our density map A. And then we're going to make another one of just the opposite parts that we want. So I'm going to save a copy of this file. I'll call this density map B, just so I don't lose the first one. And then what we want to do is take these, so these are our base paths, and just scale them down a little and line them up exactly wherever we want it to go, and then make those white and everything else black, and grass will go just exactly there. So why we drew out these circles is because we can use these to cut into this and get an exact rounded edge on this. So if we're thinking about it, it's a baseball field and they really manicure it and it's really exactly these corners, we can get all this to line up really nicely. So I'm going to grab all of those and make them like a bright color, and we're just going to cut with Command X and then paste in front with Command F. And now we can use those to cut into these after we scale them a little. So let's say that there's grass exactly lining up to the inside of this. Maybe that's how the dimensions of this infield are, even though they're all precise. Let's break the rules a bit, or, however we want to do this. So what we can do is let's draw a guide here, and here for the top one, and we'll make an inaccurate baseball field, and people who are looking up exactly the dimensions are probably going to call me on it and say that it's not right, but we're talking about growing grass here, so not concerned about it right now. But what I'm going to do is scale this in just a little bit by going to Object, Transform, Scale. And I want to do it this way so I can mimic the number on the other side. So what I'm going to do is do non-uniform and turn on Preview. And then for horizontal, I'm going to take it in 60 and do OK. And then slide it exactly back over to this rule that I drew a second ago based on where the edge was. And for this bottom one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab that Object, Transform, Scale, and I'm going to do 100 horizontal and 60 vertical. So then it's going to scale that exactly the same because we want to be precise, but vertically, and do OK. And then I can slide that back up. And why we kept these circles is because now I can use the Pathfinder if I go to Window, Pathfinder, if I don't have it open. And I can cut the edges and get that nice rounding that'll match up to our green grass exactly on this white one. So I'm going to grab this yellow circle and this foul line that we have and do minus front, and that's going to cut out of it. And then for this one, I know I'm going to need this twice, so I'm actually going to copy it just so it stores it on my clipboard, and then have this selected and shift select this one, and same thing, minus front, so it'll cut out whatever is on the front from the back. And then I'm going to Command F or edit paste in front so I get that one back because I need it on this side. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Grab this, shift select this, minus front. And now this is in the back, so I actually need to edit, cut or Command X and then Command F to paste in front. And then just grab this one, and again, cut this out. And now what I have is these very specific lines that are going to match up, and all I actually need is these to be white. So I'm just going to make these white, and now we can't see them, but what I'm going to do is just grab a rectangle and just draw around everything, make this black, and then I'll just do edit cut, and then edit paste in back. And if I change this yellow circle to black, now we can see that we have a map that matches up exactly to our other one with just this is white. So I'm going to do the same thing of save for web or file save as a JPEG if you like working that way. Save it, and I'll call this density map B, in this case 3, because this is my third time with my little test. And then back in Cinema 4D, I can minimize this, and I'm going to make a duplicate of this grass by option dragging it, and I'll double click this and I'll call this foul lines. And now for the density texture, I can grab that other map with just those on it. And the difference between these two textures now is only this one has this diamond and this one is just the foul lines. So on my main grass, now if we think about this as nicer looking grass, I might want it to be a little brighter green and really brighten this up a bit so it looks like it's nice baseball field grass. And then for my foul lines, I'm going to make the top completely white so it's painted. And then I can keep that green on the bottom. So we figure it's actually just been painted and it probably doesn't get the bottom. So we can, if it's showing through. And then maybe I figure, they have the groundskeepers have really good control over this. So maybe I'll make that even denser and a little shorter. And that's why this is so cool, is because you can get really precise and really mimic the idea of a lot of stuff that they'd be doing with the groundskeeping crew and all sorts of stadium stuff that they would be doing. So now if I just zoom in here, and I'll do a little high res render so we can really get the detail and see what's going on. So I'll put this at like 800. And I got my lights, shadows on, and ambient occlusion. And now let's shift R and we'll take a look at this. And we don't get the foul lines because I forgot one critical step. I have to actually add that texture to my landscape. And all I need to do that is I have my 3 textures, my dirt, grass, my foul line. And if I just drag that to the landscape, and let's try and do this again so it actually shows up, Shift R, and I'll make my point. And there we go. Then we can see that this is lining up. And that's probably not the world's most accurate baseball field. They're a little thick, but that's what's nice is we can go back in Illustrator. And if we just wanted to undo all of this and get back to our foul lines, we could continue to edit this. So figure, if we want to get really precise with this of maybe these foul lines are somehow a little tiny path of grass that's cut in the middle of them. So I'll just scale this one down and scale this one down and use those center rules. And the point of this and why it's a good point that we can do this is we can really quickly test these and then change them. And then I can just use those same techniques of cutting out of this one, cutting out of this one with the Pathfinder, pasting that in front, cut this one, cut this one, and same thing. Now let's make a change and show how quickly it is to fix this if it came out not what we wanted. So again, just black in the background and then white. For our main parts, I'll save and replace this and just replace that JPEG. And now if I go back into Cinema 4D, if I wanted to see how that lines up, and let's change something a little more. Let's grab the foul lines, and maybe that's really short. Somehow they've done that, like I said. So we'll just do blade length 10, and then density texture. I just need to reload that image, and you can see that it reloads that. Or I can click the buttons and go get it again in case it's not loading up right. And again, just do a quick Shift R. And now we can see that we've shifted over those foul lines exactly. And now we've very quickly made a change in Illustrator. And like I said, we can get very precise with where these fall or have them cutting into this grass or in the middle of it if they somehow cut this amazingly accurate foul line. And you can do all sorts of stuff with this. And that's why this density map on the texture is such a cool and powerful thing, because we can get really precise with programs like Photoshop and Illustrator and cut grass and then invert it to cut lines out of it, and do the same sort of thing if we wanted to do a football field as an example. The only difference with my landscape in this shot is just it's wider and it's at an aspect ratio of 2000 by 1000. And if we look at my density map for that, I have this one that I've drawn out. So it's only gonna draw grass where it's white. So this would be my green one. So all of my green, and then I could very easily grab all of these shapes, invert the color to white, and then just draw a black rectangle in the background. And that would be, now it will grow grass everywhere here. And I could go even further if I didn't want the end zone to be the white lines. So these would be the white lines that are painted on. And then I could even fill in this with black. So it's drawing the white, but it's keeping this. So then this area would be empty. And then I could save this again as density map B for football. And then for the last one, if I want the end zone to be a different color, I could make just the end zone white and then just delete everything else except the background. And now I have this shape. Again, point of it being that it's exactly lining up with where the other lines were. If I undo that quickly, the line's cutting exactly. So I could save that as a JPEG of football map C, and I could keep going, get really specific if I had logos cut out of it or something further like that. And then on this, same idea, I have three textures of my grass. So here's my green grass, here's my white paint lines of those little thin lines, and then I have another grass texture that's blue grass with the bottoms being green, so it looks like it's painted of just the end zone. And then if I rendered that out as I did earlier, we get these really specific cuts, and it looks like it's actually grass because it's bended and painted on there. And with the end zone one, I even, again, pushed it a little further and made that grass even more manicured, if that would possibly be a thing that they would ever do in a stadium, of if that one's even shorter somehow, or we could really edit these. And that's the idea about this, is I really like this density texture thing, and you can get really, really precise with it and add a lot of control and very accurately mimic the idea of stadiums or grass or painting on grass, and this kind of very specific thing I was trying to come up with of doing this sports graphics and trying to make this accurate. So I was really excited about this one. It's a new feature in R15 that came out a couple months ago, and I hope you learned a lot. It was really helpful for me when I figured this out, and thanks for watching. And as always, be sure to subscribe on youtube.com/Sean Frangella for more animation and Cinema 4D videos, and check out my site at SeanFrangella.com, as well as Facebook.com/Vital if you want to request tutorials or ask questions or anything like that. So thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video.